I really like to use rounded corners in my designs, but some of the visuals in Power BI don't have the option to add roundings. Here is this dashboard, for example, and as you can see, I used rounding everywhere except in the bar chart because there is simply no option to round the endings. It is only possible with workarounds, and in this video I want to use Deneb to create this bar chart from scratch with rounded corners. So let's get into it. Deneb is a custom visual and it uses Vega and Vega Lite languages, which is based on JSON and works with JSON objects. If you download the file from the description, you already have it under the visuals, but otherwise you can click on these three dots and get more visuals and search for Deneb here and download the first one. If for some reason you don't want to or you can't download it within the file, you can also search for it in Google. Look for Deneb Power BI app source. Then go on the first result and make sure that you are logged in with your Microsoft account, and then you can click on Get It Now and it's just going to download it. Then in Power BI, clicking on the three dots again, you can import a visual from a file. Click on Import and then go to your download location and select this PBI viz. This is the visual. Then we can add it to the canvas and we are going to drag the data on the values field we want to use. It's going to be the country column and the sales measure. Let's go to financials, measures, and look for those. First of all, country, and then I'm going to select the sales measure as well. And how to create visuals with it, we have to click on the three dots in the top right corner and then click on Edit. Here we can select the language. I use Vega Lite because it's a bit easier. And then here we can already select a template. And I'm going to select this simple bar chart. Then for the category, we can select country, and for the measure, the sales measure. Then click on Create. And this is how the chart looks like by default. A simple bar chart with the axis. And here on the left, this is the underlying code. This is where we are going to work. So the left side is, so to say, the input and the right side is the output. As I said before, Deneb works with JSON objects and the objects are wrapped in curly brackets. For example, here this x-axis is an object. And within an object, there are one or multiple specifications which always consist a key or a name and a value. For example, here the x-axis has the specification field, which is the sales measure, and also the type, which is quantitative because it's number value. From top to bottom, here you see the data, which defines the data set. You could also enter here manual data. After that, the mark specifies the visual object. Here, this is a bar type. And then in the encoding, we can define data attributes and map them to the visual properties. Within the encoding, you can see that there are two different objects. So an object can be also wrapped within another one. Let's start to work with it. For example, as a starter, we could change the sorting of this y-axis. And here there is an attribute called sort. And I want to sort it by the x-axis, which is the sales, in a descending order. So I'm going to type -x. If you click here on apply changes, then you see how it's going to be sorted. And here next to it, we can also enable that these changes apply automatically. Let's enable that. And we can continue to work with the y-axis and we can look up the documentation in Google. Let's go and look for Vega Lite axis, for example. Then go on the first result. And here you can find tons of information. If you scroll down, here you can see how we are going to use it. I'm also going to add it already. Going here, axis equals, and opening the curly braces. And let's say we want to remove the title. Let's go back to the documentation. And in the overview, we can click on title. And here, immediately in the description, you can see if the title is null, then it will be removed. And this is what we want. Title is null. And as you see, the title got removed. Then let's remove these little ticks here. They are also called ticks in the documentation. Let's scroll up to the overview again, going to ticks. And this is a Boolean type, so we can turn it off by putting the value false. Let's try it. Also got removed, and then there is a baseline there. This is called domain, and this also needs to be false. Now you don't see the baseline anymore. You can comment out parts of the code the same way you would do writing DAX formulas. Holding down Shift, Alt, and A, you can comment out a section of the code and you see how it changes. I remove the comments and you see that the baseline is gone. Going back to the documentation, you can also read about the domain. This is the axis baseline. Next, let's change the label color. We want to use a bluish color for it. And the hex code is going to be 737D89. Then we can also change the label font. I don't know what font is it, but we want to use Segway UI. So add comma and type label font equals Segway UI. We can also change the font size. Label font size equals, and here we have to add the pixel value. If we go back to the visual, our font size for the y-axis is 9 point. And we have to add the value in pixels. So we need to convert the 9 point into pixels. Let's go to Google and look for 0.2 pixel converter. Let's select the first one. And here we can add 9 point, convert it, and it equals 12 pixels. Let's go back to Deneb. Open our visual editor again and add 12. Also, the labels are pretty close to the bars. We can put a larger gap in between and we can change the label padding attribute to 10 pixels. So that's interesting in Deneb, that you can customize every single element. It's more work, but you have more freedom. We are done with the y-axis. Then moving to the x-axis, actually we want to remove everything here. So I'm just going to come to the code and type within the x-axis. If you go back to the axis documentation and scroll to the very top, here you can see that if you set the axis to null, it's going to remove it. Let's try it. Axis equals null, and the x-axis is removed. After that, we can remove this container, this outline which embraces these bars. We have to do it outside of the encoding and also outside of the mark. And we have to give a new specification, which is going to be view, colon, curly braces. And here we can set the stroke to null. Don't forget the comma at the end. And the container is disappeared. If you go to the documentation and look for Vega Light view, open the first result. Here you can read more about the properties of this view, what you can do there. If you scroll down, you can see how to change the color, for example, adding a fill, turning it into yellow. I'm not going into details with the documentations, I just do the steps, but you can read them on your own if you want. Now let's customize the bars. Let's add the rounding to them. Besides the documentation, what I also like to use is Chat GPT. So let's ask how to round these corners. I already have the prompt here, I'm just going to copy it. I have the following code of a bar chart in the Deneb visual in Power BI. How can I make the bars have rounded corners? I'm also going to copy the code. And let's see. Well, it changed something, but it's not immediately visible what, so I'm just going to ask it to show the changes with comments. And it's right there. It added this corner radius and within the bar mark. I'm just going to copy it and going to the bar mark here on the top, comma, and you see the rounding immediately. I'm going to change it to 8 pixel. This only changed the top roundings and not the bottom ones. If you would remove here this end part, then it would also change the rounding in the bottom. I don't recommend it because it makes the bar charts less readable. One of the reasons why bar charts are great, because they have this common baseline and it makes it very easy to compare them in length. But these roundings are kind of breaking this line, so it makes it a bit harder to read. That's why I would suggest only change the endings of it. Then we can also change the color, and I would also change the padding to make it a bit larger. Let's ask Chat GPT how to do it. How can I change the color? And here I'm going to add a hex code. Color of the bars to 527193 and make the inner padding larger. If you look at the code, first of all, here is the color in the mark object. Let's copy it. And yeah, I changed the color. It's almost the same, but not quite. And for the padding, it added this configuration or config. And within that, it changed the bin spacing. Let's see. I'm going to copy it as well. And copy it right after the encoding. Okay, I have 2 commas. And does it change it? No. So yeah, my experience with ChatGPT was, and I also tried DeepSeek, that for some basic level stuff it worked okay, but for some more advanced stuff, not really. And I think changing the padding like this is also not necessarily a more advanced thing to do, but still didn't quite work. But let's see what it says if we say the inner padding didn't work. Okay, here, then let's try this one. I'm going to copy this scale. This is within the encoding, within the Y, after the axis. Let's copy it. I'm gonna remove this part here and adding it right after the axis. And it also didn't work. It says band padding inner is not allowed. So it doesn't seem to exist, or it's not valid here in this field. But it almost got it right. What we need here is not band padding inner, but simply padding inner. And that gives us a percentage value where we can increase it between 0 and 100%. Let's put it to 20%. We could also make it very narrow, for example, 95%. And it's almost just a line. I'm gonna put it back to 20. After that, we can add the data labels. We cannot enable data labels the same way we did with the access values. We have to add another object, another mark object, which is a text, and we have to align it with the bars. So it's going to be at the end 2 visuals, so to say. One of them is these bars, and the second one is the text labels. And both of them are layered on top of each other. We have here the mark bar. Then we have the encoding, which belongs to it. So we can come to the end and add a new mark. Mark, and it's going to be type text. I forgot the colon here. Then comma. And I'm just going to copy the same encoding to it. right below of it. And it doesn't work that because whenever we use multiple marks, we have to list them within a layer. So I'm going to come before this first mark and add the layer, colon, and here it already prompts these brackets. These brackets are for arrays or a list of items. Every mark and everything within these layers needs to be within these brackets. So I'm going to open it here and then scroll down to the very bottom and end it just before this last curly bracket. After that, we also have to combine what belongs together. So put the mark and encoding within an object, meaning within these curly braces, and do the same with the mark type text. Let's go to the first mark and in front of it type these curly braces. Then come to the very end just before the comma and before the other mark and end the braces. Then come to the next mark, do the same. And just before this bracket, add the curly bracket. Now both of these are visible, but it's still not working. Maybe we can ask Chat GPT what's missing. I'm going to copy the code and let's type, I want to add labels to the end of the bars. How should I change the code? How should I change the code? Then copy the code. And if it's done, scroll down to this mark text. And here you see it added some changes. We can look into it later, but first there is another thing that's been added. And this is this text object or text specification here within the encoding. This is something we don't have. So the mark text changes the visual properties, so to say, but we have to add within the encoding what the text should show. We have to map the data to the text. Let's copy it. And let's copy it right after the X specification. I always have these double commas. And there you go. So what this definition does here is mapping the data to the text value. So here in the mark, we define some attributes to the object, to the visual item. And here in the encoding, we map what the text should show. Let's check it also in the documentation. I'm going to look for Vega Light and let's say bar chart label, which is going to be this text field. And yeah, here as you can see, the same structure. There is a layer and the layer consists the mark bar, and then the mark text has also this text encoding. What's different here compared to our code is that the encoding is only once and it's outside of the layer. So that's a way to define a common encoding for multiple marks, is to define it outside of the layer. Whenever you define then an encoding directly after the mark, it's going to overwrite this encoding here. So let's do the same. Let's go back to the code and I scroll up and going to copy the entire encoding from the mark bar, like up until this point. Yeah. Cut it and let's put it in front of the layer. Comma. Still looks the same. And let's remove the encoding also for the text mark. But we have to keep this text part. So just remove the Y and the X axis. Also the comma. And we still have the visual intact. And yeah, it's just simplifying it, makes it easier to read as well. I'm going to remove this comment here. We don't need that. And let's look into the formatting of the text. It added some sort of format, but this is not quite what we want. What we want is to show with one decimal value in millions, the numbers. What this one does is point to F. It just says how many decimal values should be shown after the comma. If I put 2, then you see 2. If I put 5, then it shows 5. And how to change this format? I didn't immediately find the documentation for it. It's not covered really in this Vegalite documentation. This is a so-called D3 pattern. So I was looking for D3 format. I visited it often seemingly. Let's select the first one. Here you can find different formattings. This was the first one. This is what also Chat GPT said. And then if you look down a little bit or scroll down, then you see this 42 million. And this is what we need. And this 0.2s gives this SI prefix with 2 significant digits. Let's try it. So instead of F, I put S. And this is also what we wanted. The millions with 1 comma decimal value. There is one problem with it, that it shows only 2 digits, not decimal values, digits. That means if we have a value above 10 million, then it's not going to show the decimal value. Go back to the report and I deselect the selection here. And you can immediately see that the decimal values disappeared. I go back to edit. We could change it to 3 digits, then the decimal values are back. But then whenever you filter the visual, then it's going to have either 1 or 2 decimal values. I didn't find a way to format it with these formatting options, but what we can do is to use a measure here instead of this D3 formatting pattern. And I already created a formatted measure. If you select this sales million, here you can see that I added how it should be formatted. Let's drag it on our values field. And we are going to use the text field sales M million. And there you have it. Problem is that we don't see the million yet, even though I put it there. But if you look at the data here on the bottom, here this sales million, this is the raw value. This is just the result of our calculation here. And if you look at the last column, that is the formatted version of it. And we can add this column here in the field to underscores and select formatted. I need to remove this part. And it says NaN. But if you remove everything else, then it's going to work. Because this is not a quantitative field anymore. It's just a text. And it's also formatted, so we don't need anything else. Another problem I had that I wanted to use a comma as a decimal separator because in Germany we use that. But here it has by default the point. What I did is that I just simply created another measure where I defined this formatting directly in the measure and I added that it should follow the German formatting. I'm going to replace it for me. You don't have to do it. And I remove the sales million. I don't need it. And now it asks what should replace the sales million. I select the sales million formatted and just applying it. It's undefined because here it still has this formatted tag, but we don't have this column anymore. We don't have this formatted column. It's formatted directly in the measure. And now I have the commas. After that, we can reposition it and change the color. Let's go back to Chat GPT. And if you look here in the mark type text, it added a bunch of things. I'm just going to copy the entire code here with the comments and add it below the mark type text. I add the comma and put the values. And the labels disappeared because the color is white. I'm going to change it. And I have this hex code 555D67. So what do we have here? The alignment is aligned to the left. so it moved the bars actually to the right. That's something weird, because if I write right, it moves them inside the bars to the left. So I don't know it exactly. Then the baseline, it says it's in the middle, and this is correct, but it's also in the middle by default. So we can remove this line completely. I'm also going to remove the comments here. This dx is giving this gap between the bar and the number or the label. If I change it to 10, it's larger. If I put, for example, -10, it puts the labels closer to the bar. Then the font size is 12. It's 12 pixels. If we go back and look into our original visual, the data label values are DIN, 10 points. So we have to convert the 10 points into pixel again. We go back to the editor and let's look into the converter. 10 points equal 13.33 pixels. I'm going to add that. Of course, we have to add the point, not a comma. And it's also DIN. I want to change the font style, and that can be changed simply adding a font, colon, and I'm just going to put DIN and the comma at the end. I remove these comments here. The font weight is okay. So this is the looks we were going for. If you want to read about it more, you can go to the Vega Lite documentation, text documentation. And if you scroll down, you can read all these properties here. Here you can see this DX, then the font, which sets the typeface of the text, font size, and so on. Another thing I wanted to add is adding a gradient color. This was not in the original visual because it's not even possible. But since we are in Deneb and it's possible here, let's do it. I'm going to go back to the documentation and look for Vega Lite gradient. I go on the first result, and here is a code immediately for it. If you scroll down to see a larger code, then you can also see that it puts it to the mark, to the color. So let's do that. I'm going to copy it and going back to our code. I'm going to add it to the mark bar and replace the color here with this code. And it worked. You see it immediately shows a gradient. It says that the gradient should be a linear, and it has different offsets at 0%, at 50%, and at 100%. What I want is to have our blue color at the end and just simply having it transparent at the bottom. So we will have only two stops at 0% and 100%. Let's remove the 50% stop. And then I'm going to change the code. I'm going to add this hex code and replace blue. And I also replace red with it. And here I'm going to add the opacity to it. So if I put, for example, 30%, it's only going to be 30% opaque. And I can put 50%, then it's going to be 50% opaque and also 50% transparent. By default, the direction of the gradient is horizontal, so it works for us. But if you go back to the documentation, here in this area chart, you see some other definitions as well. This X and Y axis. And if you scroll up, you see what these properties are. You can change based on the coordinates in which direction should the gradient go. I'm going to copy all these coordinates and see what happens. I copy it before my gradient, like this. And you see that it overrode the direction and it goes from bottom to top. How it works is the X1 from the left side to the right side to X2. And the Y1 goes from top to y2 to the bottom. So if we say that we want to have from left to right, on the left side, so x1 should be 0, that's where the gradient should start, and it should stop at x1. And in the vertical direction, there should be no gradient going. So I'm going to put 1 here. It's the same result, but here we have more control how we want to direct the gradient. We are almost done. There is one more thing I want to add, which is a tooltip, because maybe you want to show one and currently it's not available. Let's go back to the documentation. And I'm going to look for Vega Light tooltip. Go to the first result. And here, if you scroll down, here it says how to enable the default tooltip. If you look into the code, it adds the property tooltip within the mark and sets it to true. It looks like this. Then we can do the same in our bar mark. Type bar colors, and I come to the end of the color, comma, tooltip, colon, true. And it shows the default tooltip. This is maybe not how we want it, however, because the sales number is not displayed the same way like the number here. And also the country, I would prefer it to be above the sales. If we go back to our documentation and scroll down, here we see that we have more options. We can say how and what fields should be displayed. It adds the field and the type to it and also a title. Let's try it. I'm just going to copy it back into the tooltip. First of all, something is missing. This is in an array. That's one thing. And another thing is that it's within the encoding this time. Not directly in the bar properties, but it's in the encoding. I'm not sure how it works exactly. I just did what I saw. So let's go back to the code. And I'm going to put it in brackets. And let's copy it within the encoding. I'm just going to copy it here in the top encoding after the x-axis, like this. Now we have the tooltip there, but we still have to adjust it. First of all, the first field should be country. And I think we can remove all the other attributes because the type is nominal, but I don't think we have to define it here. And the title is going to be the same like the field name. And it works. It shows the country, then the other field. This is the sales million formatted. And in this case, I'm going to remove the type, but the title should show sales. Yeah, it looks good. We can also change the font color and the background color. And we don't change it in the code, but we have to come to the visualizations pane, go to general, tooltips, and here we are going to add a label color. I'm going to copy the hex code, which is the same color what we have for the countries. And the value color is going to have the same color what we have for our values. And we don't have to change it for the real text. Then let's go to the background and add this hex code FAFBFD. This is how it would look like. It matches the overall design better. We can also add the page as a tooltip the same way. If you go back to the tooltip options, select the type report page and the page tooltip. I created another page already and it's called tooltip, and it would look like this. And we are done with it. Let's go back to the report and we can replace our original bar chart Here we still have the background. I just go to Formatting, General, Effects, and remove the background and move the visual on top of the other one. Like this, and also measuring it like this. Then I open the selection pane and hide the bottom bar chart. And this is how it looks at the end. This is a lot of effort just to have rounded corners in a bar chart. But the good thing is that you can use this code as a template and use it also in your other projects. You just have to replace the data and maybe do some adjustments and you are good to go. If you watch it and you work in the Power BI visualizations team, it would be really great if this feature would be available directly in the bar chart. Other than that, let me know what you think about the video in the comment section. If there is enough interest, I can make similar videos on Deneb. And you can also subscribe not to miss anything. See you next time.